What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a spoiler-free review for Disclosure Day. There'll be no disclosing the disclosure at the end of Disclosure Day in my review for Disclosure Day, but I wish there had been more of a disclosure at the end of this movie, because I think a lot of people, no matter how much of an enthusiast you might be for the subject of aliens or UFOs or whatever the case might be, I think a lot of people are going to have the exact same feeling that I did walking away from this movie. Didn't Spielberg already tackle this train a couple times in the past, and didn't he already do so in far superior fashion? Because for my money, Close Encounters of the Third Kind is not my favorite science fiction movie, but it's a very strong contender. My favorite science fiction movie is Alien, directed by Ridley Scott. But Close Encounters of the Third Kind is that perfect blend of awe and wonder and a little bit of horror and a little hard, gritty science fiction, but it's the perfect cocktail, the perfect stew of all the various ingredients that go into making a great movie about UFOs. And obviously, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, I was taken to see that in the theater by my grandmother when I was a little kid, and it probably has more heart than just about any movie that's ever been made in any era, in any country. While I prefer Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the heart of E.T., it's like you can't even think about it without getting goosebumps up and down your arms. Disclosure Day it feels like a movie where Steven Spielberg and writer David Koepp were pouring all their knowledge and all their enthusiasm for the subject matter into a movie, but what they forgot to include was the entertainment value. There are a few half-hearted kind of misfires when it comes to trying to create the awe and wonder that we associate with Steven Spielberg and his filmography, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But it seems like they're trying so hard to capture the awe and wonder, they forgot to breathe a little life into this movie. But maybe I'm putting the cart in front of the horse, because I haven't even described the premise yet. Here is the premise as written over on IMDb. If you found out we weren't alone, if someone showed you, proved it to you, would that frighten you? And that's okay, but let me speak on behalf of some of my friends that are really into this subject, because I regard myself as a bit of like a non-combatant when it comes to UFOs, where I neither try to disclose nor conceal anything that I see or hear. I'm just always, I keep a permanent open mind, but I'm not a fanatic on the subject. And I've seen a few documentaries about it, and sometimes I find some of the evidence interesting. Sometimes I'm like, oh, y'all are just playing make-believe. But I have a few friends that are obsessed with this subject matter, and I suspect, without speaking, I'm running the risk of speaking on their behalf, but I would hazard a guess, they'll come away from this movie and say, that's it? Like, that's all you're going to share? Like, I thought this movie was called Disclosure Day. I was hoping for something new. It feels like this movie, it's almost like a summary of a lot of the feelings and beliefs and things we've been exposed to over the last 50, 60, 70 years, but it doesn't offer anything that new or that groundbreaking that's going to kind of shine fresh light. It's almost like we're going to bring you up to speed to where you are right now in 2026, but we're not going to take any risks, and we're not going to basically come up with anything that might seem groundbreaking or awe-inspiring, the way Close Encounters of the Third Kind was back in the late 70s. But I must admit, initially, I was kind of into the story. It felt a little bit like a movie like Enemy of the State from director Tony Scott back in the late 90s. One of those paranoid thrillers where you have two people on the run, and it's the kind of movie we've seen a billion times over. Alfred Hitchcock made several movies where you have two people on the run where they have a secret and the bad guys are trying to get them. Probably the best example of that would be North by Northwest, which is a movie that has sex appeal and charm and comedy, in addition to all the paranoid thriller stuff that you're hoping for with a movie of that kind. But initially, as Disclosure Day got underway, I was like, all right, they're kind of diving right in with chases and plotting and scheming, and Colin Firth is the bad guy and Josh O'Connor's the good guy, and let's see what happens. But the movie very quickly flies off the rails because it chooses not to have one couple on the run, but two couples on the run. Because in one storyline, we have Josh O'Connor and Eve Houston trying to avoid the bad guys, and then in yet another story, we have the exact same framework where Emily Blunt and Wyatt Russell are trying to avoid the bad guys while they're on the run. And I kept thinking to myself, for the first 45 minutes to an hour, this movie would be shorter and so much more focused and have so much more forward momentum if you were to merge these two couples into one couple. Basically give all the qualities of both men and all the qualities of both women, stir them together, and let us just stay on the main couple or the bad guys throughout the story, because what this movie really lacks is a sense of momentum. It is it is slow going at first because they're cross-cutting between all these various storylines where it really takes its time kind of getting up to speed. And obviously, it's easier said than done, collapsing those two storylines into one. But I think one of the biggest obstacles this movie is going to have in terms of being a successful movie is both the pacing as well as the runtime. The movie is 2 hours and 25 minutes long, and it feels considerably longer. And I feel like if they had found a way to shave a half hour off of it, that definitely would help the movie. And who am I to presume to tell David Koepp anything about screenwriting, because David Koepp collaborated on one of my all-time favorite screenplays ever, Carlito's Way. Admittedly, it was an adaptation, but he and Brian De Palma, they spun movie-making gold out of that material, and it became, I think, one of Brian De Palma's greatest movies. So I've been a fan of David Koepp for many, many decades, but if you look at his career, there's plenty of dog shit in his career as well. He's had some massive hits like Jurassic Park and the original Spider-Man directed by Sam Raimi. But he's also got some turkeys like Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a movie which I thought at that time was one of the worst movies I'd ever seen until I saw Dial of Destiny about 15 years later, which was a considerably worse movie. But even during the first 45 minutes to an hour of this movie, I could have handled the slow plodding pace if it had led somewhere that I really wanted to go. The big problem with this movie is that where it ends up gave me unintentional laughter, and that's not the emotion they're going for with this movie. They're going for transfixed, like, oh my God. Like, they really want a spellbound audience. But at one point, once again, this is non-spoiler, when some of the kind of secrets and revelations contained within the story start to be unveiled, at one point I had to, because I almost kind of guffawed and cracked up, because this is not a spoiler, but there's a shot of Emily Blunt and Josh O'Connor sitting side by side. And Josh O'Connor looked like such a dumbass and such a doofus, kind of staring off into space. I almost just started cracking up then and there. So I was not falling under the movie's spell at all. And when you think about the power of Steven Spielberg as a filmmaker in the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s, that power of having the audience kind of eating out of the palm of his hand, it used to be so effortless. And he did it over and over and over again. We kind of took it for granted. But as a little kid in the 1980s, Steven Spielberg, which is a household name, he represented to the 1980s what like Alfred Hitchcock represented to suspense in the 1950s. Everybody knew who Steven Spielberg was because not a week would go by where we wouldn't see him on the cover of Time magazine posing with dinosaurs or Indiana Jones or whatever the case might be. But it was like every couple of years we knew he was going to come along and blow our minds. And basically for me, his entire track record from Duel up through Saving Private Ryan is pretty tough to beat. And within that track record in the 70s, 80s, and 90s are two of the most popular movies ever made. If you look at the top 10 most popular movies ever, adjusted for inflation, just in terms of pure raw tickets sold, Jaws and E.T. are still in the top 10, which is insane. He's the only director who has two movies in the top 10 most popular movies ever. So for a long time there, he just had his finger right on the pulse of America. And when you see his depictions of suburbia in a movie like E.T., I don't know if a movie's ever done a better job of capturing what it felt like to live in the suburbs in America in the early 80s than a movie like E.T. And right down the road, they were shooting Poltergeist, which he also produced and kind of sort of was directing over Tobe Hooper's shoulder. But that also captured suburbia in the best possible way. Steven Spielberg just... his taste and his impulses and his creative vision were perfectly dovetailing with American culture at that time. But with this movie, I feel like the biggest problem is that Steven Spielberg doesn't come across as out of touch, because I hate that expression, out of touch. If one person is out of touch with your own ideas or sensibilities, well, then the reverse is probably also true. But it does seem that Steven Spielberg is a little bit uninvested, where he's not imbuing these scenes with everything that he needs to, because some of it just comes across as ridiculous and unintentionally comedic, like Emily Blunt's character. Either she was miscast or the part was miswritten, if that's even a word. But she's such a buffoon for the great majority of the movie and indulging in all these emotional hysterics. I'm like, Emily Blunt is a lovely woman and a very talented actress, and we've all seen her deliver good performances in the past. I think this is a strong contender for the worst performance that I've seen by her, and I'm not familiar with her entire career, but she is dreadful in this movie. And I was like, please just stop doing everything that you're doing, because you're killing me with these histrionics and whatnot. But Josh O'Connor, who's a ferociously talented actor, we've seen him do great work in movies like Challengers and Wake Up Dead Man. I mean, I thought he ran away with Wake Up Dead Man and made the rest of the cast look like they were amateurs in comparison. But here, he's so bland and so soft and fuzzy and such a nice guy. He basically has no personality of any kind apart from just making doe eyes and being sympathetic the entire time, and he was driving me fucking crazy. And Spielberg used to know how to make these kind of everyman characters, like, once again, without any effort whatsoever. Look at Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That is your classic Steven Spielberg everyman character. He never did it better. But luckily, there are a few good performances tucked away in this movie. Even if the parts are underwritten, the performances are good. Like Coleman Domingo. Coleman Domingo is rapidly turning into one of those actors where he could fall out of bed, fall out a window, land like on a spiked fence, and still manage to like drool out a good performance in his dying breath. He's that talented, and obviously between TV shows and movies, he's having his moment. He's getting a lot of work. But every time he shows up, I'm like, God damn, dude, you're very, very talented. And so, yeah, Coleman Domingo's good. Colin Firth is pretty good. Colin Firth, I mean, he's another ferociously talented actor. I'm a big fan of Colin Firth. But with this part, it's just not that all exciting. And he exudes the proper level of menace. I just don't think this is David Koepp's finest effort as a writer, because we've seen him do much better work many times over in the past. But in addition to the subpar screenplay and some of the clumsy characterization that we see in the movie, there's an even larger problem. The action. The action's kind of dreadful. The action's so bad in this movie that I feel like if they just cut every car chase and every shootout entirely from the movie, it would not only be a shorter movie and a cheaper movie, it'd be a much more engaging movie, because there wasn't a single action scene which added thrills or excitement or stakes. There's a car chase in this movie that's so inept and so amateur and using so many clumsy digital creations. Like, just don't even put it in there. We've all seen great car chases in the past. We've all seen movies like Bullet and The French Connection and whatnot. There are no substitutes to watching actual real cars doing real things, even if they're not doing all the flips that you want them to do. But like, and speaking of CGI cars, CGI animals, awful. Spielberg was better at CGI in the early 90s when he was creating dinosaurs for Jurassic Park. There's some animals in this movie. Like, did y'all even watch this movie before putting it on the screen? Like, this is not on the level of Steven Spielberg. It's not even on the level of M. Night Shyamalan. I joked when I first saw the trailer that it felt like M. Night Shyamalan on a bad day when I saw Emily Blunt doing that, making all those stupid sounds. It's like, this is inept and not doing it for me whatsoever. But all right, I got to go into one mild spoiler. It's not related to the plot, but it's related to one action scene. But there's a scene in here where Josh O'Connor, let's just say he comes across like Captain Obvious, because he's spying on a house where all the bad guys have showed up. They're all tracking him, and like Secret Service agents and like every kind of agent you can think of. There's like 50 of them. They have all their cars and their guns and their walkie-talkies, and they're scanning the horizon. Josh O'Connor is watching them across a field behind a fence that is not a wall. It's a fence with like little bits of wood so you can see him. And he's kind of, it's almost like, oh, because I'm hunched over, you can't see me. Like when you're playing a video game and you go into stealth mode, like, oh, I pressed down on the toggle button, so now I'm in stealth mode. It's like, but they can still see you. And he walks right up into them and gets inside one of the cars and drives through them, and it's like hitting trees, and they still can't catch him. Like, this is the worst action scene I've ever seen in my fucking life. And so maybe I'm coming across like a cynical, kind of overly demanding asshole, but I just kept finding myself laughing at the movie's expense when what I really wanted was to have one of those great Hall of Fame Steven Spielberg experiences. But to be fair, I have not had a Hall of Fame Steven Spielberg experience in the 21st century. He's made movies in the 21st century that I admire, like Munich or Bridge of Spies. Those are very well-made movies, and that's Steven Spielberg in his mature phase telling the stories that are important to him. But all my favorite Steven Spielberg movies were made in the 20th century. And I would include in that list, I'm just going to go in chronological order, Duel, Jaws, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the first one that I saw in the theater, then E.T., then Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which I also saw in the theater, Empire of the Sun, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan. And I think that's either 10 or 11 movies, which is probably ample. If I wanted to do a top 10 list of Steven Spielberg movies, I would not even have to tap into the movies made in the 21st century. But as far as science fiction goes, he's got such an incredible reputation within the science fiction genre. Let's rank all of his science fiction movies. And I've got obviously recency bias because I just had, a subpar experience watching Disclosure Day. But there are a lot of his movies that I've seen many times over, a lot of his science fiction movies where I was one and done. And depending upon how broadly we want to define the science fiction genre, some might argue that Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull should be included because, spoiler alert, the worst part of that movie takes it into sci-fi terrain with aliens at the end. But I pretend that movie doesn't exist, so it's not eligible for my ranking of Steven Spielberg's science fiction movies. But here's what I came up with walking home from the theater. I think his worst sci-fi movie is The Lost World, Jurassic Park. His second worst would be Ready Player One. I know some people liked it because it had Easter eggs and cameos. That does not make it a good movie. Then I would go with Disclosure Day, Next up, AI, artificial intelligence, which I get he was trying to keep Stanley Kubrick's vision for that story alive, but Steven Spielberg was not a good fit for that movie. Then I go with War of the Worlds, which had its moments, but still we're in one and done territory, and Minority Report, which I was also one and done. I probably owe that one another viewing because it seems like in like the 25-year interim since it came out, it keeps kind of climbing the ranks amongst people's favorite Steven Spielberg movies. But when I saw it, I was like, all right, it's cool, but I'd much rather watch my top three, all of which I've seen many, many, many times. So for my number 3, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, number 2, Jurassic Park, and number 1, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a strong contender for the best science fiction movie that I've ever seen. And I was too little to see it in the theater, so the first time I saw it was on HBO as a little kid. And that's the worst possible way. You know, pan and scan, the sides are cropped, but it still scared the ever-living shit out of me. Those scenes with the little boy early on, where he seems so fascinated by the fact that his home is being invaded by aliens, and he's like, toys, and saying all this wonderful stuff while his mother's in abject terror. I mean, I couldn't get over my fear, but at the same time, I too was fascinated. And on the DVD, when I first got in the early 2000s, there was a great behind the scenes documentary showing how they achieved some of the scenes with the little boy. Like when he walks into the kitchen and there's something going on that we can't see. And initially he's kind of curious and then he reacts and he's horrified. And apparently the way they did it, there was a present that they opened, and maybe I'm not remembering it right, but there's a guy dressed up as a clown that he knew, and the kid was kind of confused. And then there's somebody else dressed as a gorilla, where he's like, but it was one of those things where they engineered like a trick to get the emotions out of them that they wanted, because, you know, with a little kid, if they're acting too hard, it's going to come across as inauthentic. But I need to go back and rewatch that documentary just to make sure I'm getting all the details correct. But nonetheless, Steven Spielberg knew how to work with kids back then and just knew how to create that magic. And my favorite scene of the movie, Richard Dreyfuss in his stalled truck by the railroad track, and he kind of sees a ship above him, but he kind of doesn't, where it allows your imagination to fill in the gaps. And the way the lights are depicted are so eerie, and he gets that sunburn on the side of his face. It's just awe-inspiring stuff, and so much mystery and so much magic. For me, that is the essence of just childlike wonder and imagination in movies. And obviously it helps that I saw it all as a young person. But when I revisited the movie many times over as an adult, I was blown away each and every single time. And even though it doesn't even really have much of a villain, Francois Truffaut plays the villain, but he's like a total sweetheart in that movie. He's absolutely fantastic. So if this video can serve any purpose, it would be to state what a lot of people have already stated. There was an edge to Steven Spielberg that he used to have that he no longer has. Like he admitted later on in life, he would not do the ending to Close Encounters of the Third Kind as a much older man, like the same way he would in his 20s, because at the end of the movie, Richard Dreyfuss's character goes off with the aliens, but he says, now that I've got kids and a family, never in a million years would I consider leaving my family to go off on some grand adventure. Or what, like E.T., when the cops are pointing their guns at the kids, for a while he edited out the guns, turned them into walkie-talkies, and I think that's been restored in the interim, because people are like, what are you doing? Why are you changing E.T.? Or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He was going through a really gnarly divorce at that time, which brought out his darker impulses. But I think Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is one of the greatest adventure movies ever made. And it's dark and it's horrifying. And it fucked me up as a kid. But when a filmmaker starts saying, oh, I wouldn't make my best movies like that now as an older person, clearly their values are changing and their storytelling impulses are changing. And Steven Spielberg now is just not the guy that he was. He's still the elder statesman of cinema. His reputation is intact. And in 100 years, if people are still watching movies, they'll still be talking about Steven Spielberg the same way they do any great director of the 20th century. He definitely had his moment and made his mark. So I got nothing but love and affection and admiration for Steven Spielberg. And there's a side of him that is a genuine, sincere lover of film history. I think it's on the DVD for Eyes Wide Shut, but they're interviewing Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman and Steven Spielberg about their reactions to Stanley Kubrick's death. And the story, if I'm remembering it correctly, Spielberg had a bunch of friends over for dinner that night. And when they got the news that Stanley had died, he said, you know what, everybody put your forks down. We got to do something really quickly. And I don't know if it was on a DVD or a film reel or whatever the case might be, but he queued up the final scene for Paths of Glory, because he felt like while Stanley Kubrick had a reputation for being a kind of cold, calculating director, but anybody who's seen Paths of Glory can tell you he probably depicted more warmth and humanity in that final scene than in all the rest of his movies combined. So that's what Steven Spielberg wanted to watch to mark the occasion of Stanley Kubrick's death. So yeah, I love and adore Steven Spielberg. I grew up on his movies. I will never stop loving his movies. I just don't love Disclosure Day. And but if you feel differently, by all means, let me know in the comments below. But I've got to wrap up this video because I'm walking out the door in an hour to go see the new martial arts film, The Furious. And hopefully I can edit this thing and post it before I leave. But if not, I'll just edit this thing after I see The Furious. But I'm fired up to see The Furious. I hear it kicks all kinds of ass, and I'll be reviewing that tomorrow. But let me know what you think down below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell. Hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.